morning, everyone. Usually, I don't start with a long video, but this whole video is very, very worthwhile. So we're going to listen to all of it. It's Stephen Harper talking about the media during the last election. And he says it's one of the reasons why I'm no longer the Prime Minister of Canada. It's one of the reasons I lost. And he goes on to describe really concerning things. So the things that were experienced by PPC with regards to, and even Faith Goldie with regard to ads not being run on certain networks, like Bell Media wouldn't run Faith Goldie's ads, Rogers wouldn't run her ads because, I mean, John Tory owns Rogers, right? Like that is just, he is directly part of the leadership. It's called the Rogers Control Trust. And the Rogers Control Trust is like a trust to run the private billion-dollar company. And, you know, wouldn't it be nice if you just also controlled Toronto? You know, and had all of that clout. Yeah, it is, right? Anyway, so Rogers wouldn't run the ads for Faith Goldie, and Bell wouldn't run the ads for Faith Goldie, and then basically she was blacklisted and called a racist, and she still managed to get a pretty decent turnout. I think she got 15 or 13% or something like that, which, I mean, with that kind of blackout, very interesting to see that she did so well. But those tactics were used against the PPC in the 2019 election, and I assume, and I mean, you don't really trade not secrets like that, but you don't really, you know, advertise that, right? But it seems that has also been happening to the Conservative Party of Canada, and that's Stephen Harper will describe here. Here we go.
The other story, why there's no Fox News, is more interesting, and this is a major reason I am no longer Prime Minister of Canada. Because before the last election, a couple of years before the last election, one of my former communications directors got this bright idea that he got a kind of a dormant television license, got a big backer, and he would set up a Fox News North. It was called Sun News. Mm-hmm. And he went out and he hired virtually all of the right-of-center journalists in the country. There are not a lot, it's a minority, but there were some. He hired them all, and then he promptly went bankrupt. And then I went into the last campaign with virtually no right-of-center journalists in any outlet in the country. You have to know that in Canada, so that's, you know, we've got a little bit of print that's right-of-center, tiny bit of radio. You have to know that in Canada, every TV network, we got 3 major networks, every TV network is MSNBC. They're all MSNBC. You know, I hear the British people complain to me, and I've...
Sorry, my microphone didn't want to come on. Did you hear the audience's disgust there? Oh, it's all MSNBC? I just thought that was funny. Anyway, carry on.
I've checked this out with people who live in both Britain and Canada, complain to me, well, you don't have the BBC. The BBC in Canada would be the farthest right network by a country mile on television. Wow. It's that bad. So in the last election, and look, there were many reasons I lost, but one of them was the last election, they would not cover my announcements. They would not cover any gaffe of my opponent. They scrubbed it out. They actually met every day to coordinate their coverage. They would not run any ad I had that showed footage depicting my opponent in an unfavorable light. They simply refused to run the ads. So we literally were censored out of the coverage. And
So this is a tactic that's been in use. And look, it works. It works, right? Harper was absolutely panned in the press for absolutely everything he did. He held rallies and people showed up and he would do a gaffe or something like the itty bitty deficits, I think is what he said. Look where we're at. 20 billion turned into 250 billion, right? And more now, I'm sure. The last time I looked, it was 250. Have we passed 300? Have we passed the full operating budget of the year yet? But isn't that incredible that those tactics that were honed to beat Harper are being used to silence political opposition, are being used to silence anybody who is opposed to this continued march down the path of wherever these liberals are taking us, which seems to be that dictatorship that Trudeau admires so much, right? Communist China is who I'm alluding to. And why are we aligning so closely with China when their behavior is so appalling? And here, so it's really that bad that they're using those tactics across the board and they work. It's really this bad that Global News has this headline and there's 2 paragraphs, and I've highlighted them, that have to do with the headline. And the rest, well, you'll see. It doesn't really have to do with the headline. It's wild. Moving on from Mr. Harper. Global News is reporting, this is May 24th. Wuhan lab head says claims coronavirus leaked from facility are pure fabrication. Claims promoted by the Trump administration that the global coronavirus pandemic originated at the Wuhan Institute of Virology in the central Chinese city are, quote, pure fabrication, the institute's director said. I think that's the extent of the quote. Hold on. Wang Yanni was quoted by state media Sunday as saying the institute did not have, okay, here's more of a quote, any knowledge before that, nor had we ever met, researched, or kept the virus. We didn't even know about the existence of the virus, so how could it be leaked from our lab when we didn't have it? President Donald Trump and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo have repeatedly said they suspect the virus was first detected in Wuhan was somehow released from the laboratory. And then they go on to say most scientists say that the pathogen that has infected 5.3 million and killed more than 342,000, according to a tally by Johns Hopkins University, was passed from bats to humans via an intermediary species likely sold at a wet market in Wuhan last year. The virus's toll continues to ebb in Asia and other parts of the world, with China on Sunday reporting 3 new confirmed cases and 79 people remaining in treatment for COVID-19. The New York Times devoted Sunday's entire front page to a long list of names of people who have died in the pandemic. So now we've switched. So up here we were talking about the Wuhan lab saying they're pure fabrication. And that's really all that's said, right? It talks about most scientists say the pathogen leapt from bats to an intermediary. At first they were just saying it was bats and then directly to humans, but now they're saying intermediary because there was no bats sold at that place. And they're saying now they're waltzing away from the original claim of the headline, which was the Wuhan lab claims the virus leaked from the facility as pure fabrication. Now they're on to New York Times devoting the entire front page to a long list of names of people who have died in the pandemic and adding the propaganda-y, they were not simply names on a list, they were us, read the subheadline. They were us. Here's the list. And somebody said, I wonder how many names we have to get through before we find the first gunshot death or something other than COVID-19. And here's the answer. 6. Okay, not a truther. This is Alan Dominique's. He says, not a truther, but the death of the man 6 names in from Cedar Rapids was ruled a homicide. How do you get that wrong, New York Times and Cedar Rapids? This only lessens the power and gives ammo to the truthers. And here's the statement. Jordan, okay, but at least one of the names appeared to be listed on the front page incorrectly. Jordan Driver Haynes, 27, whose name was listed 6th from the top, was described on the front page as a generous young man with a delightful grin. Haynes' death has been ruled a homicide, not a COVID-19 death. CNN reported that the Times will be running a correction and will remove Haynes' name in later editions. And I don't have the link to the ruled a homicide. I don't have a link to the name. I was just looking for, because I knew I had read this and seen this earlier, earlier this morning, but I didn't flag it. But isn't that interesting, right? Like this is waltzing away from the original question, and I was gonna do a piece by piece. Originally they said we didn't do that here. We don't have bat viruses here or whatever. Here's the China's Batwoman, and this is like a 2 minutes and 43 seconds of talking about how she's a giant in the coronavirus world, and she studies bats, and she's out of the Wuhan Institute of Virology. I was just going to go through the article and kind of show you that what they're saying is at the very least not proven, but then they just started talking about other things. Like the article never comes back to the headline. It just waltzes away. So this part is, it says, in Australia, officials said 6 million residents have downloaded a mobile telephone app that helps health authorities trace coronavirus infections. Federal Health Minister Greg Hunt said the COVID Safe app is playing a strong role in Australia's response to the disease. It has nothing to do with the headline. It has nothing to do with the headline. I'm just going to, because sometimes when the liberals waltz you away from what you're talking about, you forget, right? What are we talking about? And when newspaper articles do it, apparently it's very, very effective too. And that's very interesting. Not that I hadn't noticed that before, I certainly did, but it is very effective because people, it's insidious because like you want to read about, say talking about the claims that the leaked facility are pure fabrication, but we're talking about Australia and apps. Like, how does that relate to the headline? Okay, back to this. Trump played golf at one of his courses Saturday during the Memorial Day weekend as he urged U.S. states to relax their lockdowns, yet many Americans remained cautious as the number of confirmed cases nationwide passed 1.6 million. Definitely about the claims leaked from the lab. In California, where many businesses and recreational activities are reopening, officials in Los Angeles County say they would maintain tight restrictions until July 4th. Statewide, New York reported its lowest number of daily coronavirus deaths, 84 in many weeks, in what Governor Andrew Cuomo describes as a critical benchmark. The daily death tally peaked at 799 on April 8th. Okay, you want to see something interesting? Here is the London hospital deaths. Okay, so this is a tweet from David Patton, and I don't know who David is. He's a professor of industrial economics at Nottingham University. I have no reason to disbelieve this information. Here are the regional trends for English hospital deaths by day of death. As usual, these use like for 5-day reporting tools. Main feature is London 5-day total in single figures for first time since March. So he's saying it's declining. But I wanted to point out their peak day is April 8th too, right? Their highest number of deaths, April 8th. Isn't that weird? Right? Like the peak is the same day in London as it is in California and New York, right? Weird. Oh, I don't have the numbers for California, but the same day as New York. So isn't that strange? Correlating? How does that work? I mean, science is weird and pandemics are unpredictable and stuff, but like, and it looks like this thing's burning out, right? It looks like we've peaked. It looks like this is it, right? And who knows, right? Is this the lockdown or is this the usual trend? I saw the same numbers coming out of Sweden and other countries that didn't lock down, the same declining numbers. So, and I don't have a link for those right now. It was another one I saw a couple hours ago and I didn't flag because whatever. So I'd have to dig through Twitter. If I find it, I'll put it up. But it's interesting because this goes against what they want us to believe, right? And why doesn't this article ever go back to the article headline, which was Wuhan lab says claims coronavirus leaked from the lab are pure fabrication. Like, it doesn't go back to it, right? They're talking about Trump golfing. Frankfurt, 40 people tested positive in a church. Evangelical Christians who are his base ahead of November's election. Trump on Friday called the house of worship essential and urged governors to let him reopen this weekend. However, leaders of many denominations said they plan to move more gradually and cautiously. It just never goes back. They didn't want to talk about this. They just wanted to hook people in and then have you believe that you've been satisfied. It doesn't prove anything. It doesn't even really like accidentally prove something. It just meanders and talks about a whole bunch of other unrelated issues and Donald Trump's election, and this is just misrepresentation. It's false. It's very interesting. Health Minister Patty Hadju stops Theresa Tam from answering questions about Canada's emergency stockpile. I mean, would you have been okay with Stephen Harper had he been at the helm of this and he was stopping his health minister was stopping the top doctor from updating the press on the status of the emergency stockpile? I mean, just put the shoe on the other foot. Is that okay? So why is this okay? It's not okay, right? Like it's not, but it's happening. Right? Health Minister Patty Hadju intervened Friday to stop Chief Public Health Officer Theresa Tam from answering a question at a House of Commons committee about whether Dr. Tam had warned Ottawa that the national emergency stockpile, which included protective equipment, was underfunded. And they sent all of it away in February, 17 tons or 16 tons to China to help with their coronavirus outbreak. It's not going to come here. Borders can't protect you. It's a worldwide virus already. Here's all of our stockpiles. So yeah, don't answer that question, Dr. Tam. Thanks. That implicates me. Back to this. The unusual move to shut down Dr. Tam promoted Conservatives to accuse the minister of muzzling Canada's top doctor on an issue that the public should know about, and NDP MP Matthew Green said Ms. Hadju's intervention spoke volumes. Mr. Green, the MP for Hamilton Centre, asked Ms. Hadju whether the Federal Public Health Agency had ever advised Cabinet in the past decade that the National Emergency Strategic Stockpile was underfunded or not properly mandated to stock personal protective equipment. He then asked Dr. Tam whether she personally had ever given the Cabinet that advice. Mr. Hadju responded by pointing out that she had only been health minister for less than 2 months before the pandemic hit. She added that the agency had been extremely responsible in terms of communicating to multiple governments the needs to which they have. Unless a change is being made to a program, as Hadju said, it's rare that such a specific concern would be raised at Cabinet, and usually ministers raise those issues with the finance minister directly. Anyway, when Mr. Green asked Dr. Tam the question, Ms. Hadju interjected, "Actually, I'll answer that because the conversations at Cabinet are private, as the member knows." Ms. Hadju has been a Cabinet minister since Prime Minister Justin Trudeau came to office in 2015, said she stood by comments she made in April that public health has been underfunded for decades. And I'm just going to leave this article there, but I think that it's interesting how the Canadian public just accepts this kind of stuff. Here's an interesting note as well. China condemns gross interference by UK, Australia, and Canada over HKSAR. HKSAR is the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, the two systems, one country idea, right? Anyway, the Chinese embassy in Canada on Saturday expressed strong opposition against the UK, Australia, and Canada's gross interference of domestic affairs as they issued a joint statement about China's decision to improve the legal system concerning national security in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. A draft decision on establishing and improving the legal system and enforcement mechanisms for the HKSAR to safeguard national security was submitted to the third session of the 13th National People's Congress, NPC, for deliberation on Friday. The UK and Canada and Australia issued a joint statement on Friday expressing their concern about China's proposal for legislation on national security in the HKSAR. So, China is telling the West to get lost. And what they're doing is a big deal, right? And cracking down on Hong Kong and bringing it under Beijing's control is going back on certain promises and certain agreements that were made between, like, to create the HKSAR. So, and I'm not long in the tooth. I don't know a lot about all of this. I know that they administer themselves, and it's supposed to be more free, democratic society, etc. And they're saying that if we, the West, or the globe, sit by and just watch this happen, then, they're allowing, the implications are you're letting democracy die in favor of communism, right? Scary stuff. The last little bit of scary stuff here is, I've been talking about this. I'll just leave this I'll leave the link in the description. This is the CSIS recognition of incel extremism open doors to more terrorism charges in Canada. And yeah, it's really concerning because they're not looking at Antifa. They're not looking at other terrorist groups that organize. They're looking at ideology and what's driving the crime rather than how it's perpetrated, how it's planned, what the goals are, right? If it's political or not, and it's very concerning. I'll read it. All right. Canada's spy agency will now recognize the incel movement as ideologically motivated extremism. That's the catchphrase they're using: ideologically motivated violent extremism. And they've got a IMVE. It's like the acronym, right? So that's supposed to make us feel better about them just saying, yeah, this is also terrorism. But those people who were lighting fires on railroad tracks in order to shut down the means of producing or transporting our goods in order for their political ends to be met, that's not terrorism. And in fact, we won't even give them fines. But don't you go to a park. It's so crazy. It's so crazy. But that's what they're using. Okay, IMVE, right? So just in case, it's confusing and it's done that way on purpose. Okay, anyway, which opens a new door for gender-driven violence to be treated as terrorism and a national security offense, right? Wow, I scroll down. Incel is short for involuntary celibate, an online community the Department of Women and Gender Equality describe as a subgroup of men who believe women owe them sex and blame women when they are unable to find a romantic or sexual partner despite desiring one. this is terrorism in Canada now. But it's okay if you want to light those railroad tracks on fire when there's a train coming. That's fine. No problem. But don't you do this. I mean, I'm not saying that the van attack or whatever is justified or anything to that effect. I can't believe that that's the only motivation. Like, I think that it's probably the narrative being placed over top of the crime rather than this incel thing. I mean, you know, like, people say crazy things online when they think they're anonymous, right? Like, anyway, and attributing the whole crime to that just seems nuts, and it doesn't seem like to fit with traditional police work, right? Like, if you're doing traditional police work, it seems like too convenient to say, oh yeah, he was an incel, that's why he did this. Like, come on, guys, watch one more episode of Law and Order, please. Subgroup of men, like, and we're defining terrorism as a subgroup of men who believe women owe them sex and blame women when they're unable to find a romantic or sexual partner despite desiring one. That's terrorism. And like, where's the political end for that? Like, it just throws in the face of reason and logic that this would be terrorism and the other not, right? When the definition of terrorism specifically states there must be a political motivation. You have to be acting to achieve a political means, right? Like, and if you're just getting revenge on women, like, that's a really fundamentally different crime. Like, it's a very fundamentally different thing. It doesn't make it okay, but it doesn't make it terrorism. It doesn't make it a domestic security threat. A domestic security threat is everybody's coordinating and they're going to blow up key locations, bridges, railways, things like that, things that supply the country. Like, there's a reason terrorism is taken seriously, and it's not the poor women. Like, come on. This is incredibly offensive. It's unbelievable. It's a distraction, right? It's like the house is on fire and you're worried about the pots in the kitchen. You're like, oh, we've got to get those pots. Those are great pots. We don't want to be without those. You're like, what the heck? What is wrong with you? Get out of the house. Like, anyway, back to this. Though the incel movement was singled out as an example of gender-driven violence, the agency says it's moving away from focusing on specific movements. Yeah, we don't want to make anybody feel bad, you know? In CSIS's latest annual report published Wednesday, the agency said labels such as left-wing and right-wing, which appeared in previous annual reports, will no longer be used. These terms are subjective and inaccurate. Shorthands in describing the complexity of motivations of ideologically motivated violent extremism, the report read. Instead, CSIS is adapting its language on violent extremism to be closer to how terrorism is interpreted in the criminal code, which defines it as acts motivated on political, religious, or ideological grounds. So, like, putting the ideological grounds on the same footing as political and religious, I think it's very, very dangerous. Ideologically motivated extremism, and especially if you're going to focus on it like this, like they're focusing on it as if it's the most dangerous aspect of all terrorism. Railroad track fires, don't worry about it. No problems, right? Like, blockading our means of moving goods around the country, no, that's not terrorism. I'm pausing. So it's just very strange. Okay, back to this. According to CSIS, is separated into 4 categories: xenophobic, anti-authoritarian, gender-driven, and grievance-driven violence. The change in language comes after a series of ideologically motivated violent extremist acts, including the 2018 Toronto van attack that left 10 people dead and 16 others injured, and April's mass shooting in rural Nova Scotia that killed 22 people. That's a ideologically motivated violent extremism too. They're saying that he was a woman hater. That's the whole thing. Too simple. I don't think so. The report was published one day after the RCMP and Toronto Police Services laid terrorism charges against a 17-year-old suspect in a massage parlor attack that left a woman dead and 2 others injured earlier this year. It's the first time Canadian police have recognized an alleged misogynistic crime as terrorism. Yeah, and the slippery slope continues to be sped up. This is concerning. Very, very, very scary. So, thanks for watching, everybody. Check out CanadaPoly.com. Check out CanadaReport.co. Check out SpeakingMoistly.co. And have a wonderful, wonderful day.